Welcome, fellow aviators striving for the next step in your aviation journey. I am TH, a certified flight instructor, and today we're conducting a complete, unyielding breakdown of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 39. In this explainer, we're going to master the regulatory ecosystem of airworthiness directives. Look, as professionals, we know that understanding these directives isn't just about passing a check ride, right? It's about protecting your certificate, protecting your passengers, and ensuring absolute safety every single time you push that throttle forward. So let's dive right into this. In this explainer, we'll systematically unpack the legal and operational framework of airworthiness directives. We're covering the purpose and legal definitions, compliance and regulatory violations, the role of the Federal Register, alternative methods of compliance, special flight permits, and finally, resolving document conflicts. We literally aren't leaving a single regulatory stone unturned.
All right, starting us off with Section 1, Purpose and Legal Definitions, covering 14 CFR 39.1 through 39.5.
Let's look at the foundational law established in Section 39.1. Now, Section 39.3 strictly defines airworthiness directives as legally enforceable rules. Listen to that phrasing, legally enforceable. They aren't suggestions, and they definitely aren't mere guidelines. Plus, the regulation specifies exactly what products these rules apply to. We're looking at 4 distinct categories here: aircraft, aircraft engines, propellers, and appliances. As fellow aviators, you've got to remember that an AD might not just be on your airframe. It could be isolated to your propeller hub, a specific engine component, or even an appliance installed deep within your avionics stack. Grasping this broad applicability is really the bedrock of thorough pre-flight preparation and professional maintenance oversight.
So, as professionals, we really need to understand exactly when the FAA actually steps in to issue these directives under Section 39.5. You know, the FAA doesn't just issue an AD on a whim. It's a mandatory 2-part condition. First up, the FAA has to find that a verified unsafe condition exists in the product. Honestly, this data often comes directly from service difficulty reports, or SDRs, submitted by mechanics and operators right out in the field. Second, and this is crucial, through rigorous engineering investigation, the FAA must determine that this unsafe condition is likely to exist or develop in other products of the exact same type design. This brilliantly illustrates the FAA's proactive safety mandate. I mean, if a critical failure happens on one aircraft and the engineering data shows it's inherent to the manufacturing or design process, boom, the FAA issues an AD to ensure every other aviator flying that specific type design is protected from experiencing that exact same failure in flight. Moving from the why to the what, the absolute key here is understanding exactly what is expected of us when an AD hits the books. Section 39.11 mandates the specific actions you've got to execute. An AD might specify mandatory inspections you must carry out at certain hourly intervals. Think of something like a repetitive bore scope inspection of an engine cylinder. Or it might dictate specific operational conditions or limitations you absolutely must comply with, like a hard reduction in maximum gross weight, or maybe a temporary airspeed restriction. Ultimately, it legally binds you to perform any and all actions necessary to completely resolve that identified unsafe condition before you ever take to the skies.
Moving right along to Section 2, Compliance and Regulatory Violations, encompassing 14 CFR 39.7 through 39.9.
Now, let's look at the absolute weight of compliance and the severe, compounding consequences of operating outside these strict parameters. Hear this clearly from Section 39.9, which builds directly on Section 39.7. Now, 39.7 states that anyone who operates a product that does not meet the requirements of an applicable AD is in violation. But 39.9 takes it a massive step further. It explicitly states, if the requirements of an airworthiness directive have not been met, you violate Section 39.7 each time you operate the aircraft or use the product. Think about the gravity of that for a second. If you fly a 3-leg cross-country trip in an aircraft that's out of compliance with an AD, well, you haven't just violated the regulation once. No, you have committed a separate legally actionable violation each and every time that prop turned and you operated that aircraft. The liability profile here is absolutely immense.
Now, you might logically be wondering, what happens if the aircraft has been modified, altered, or repaired in the specific area affected by the AD? Can you just claim the AD no longer applies because the part isn't original? Well, Section 39.915 gives a definitive, unwavering answer, and that answer is yes, the AD still applies. An airworthiness directive applies to each product identified in the directive, even if that individual product has been changed by modifying, altering, or repairing it in the addressed area. I mean, as much as we'd love to sometimes, you literally cannot simply engineer your way out of federal law without the FAA's explicit blessing.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, the Federal Register, specifically 14 CFR 39.13.
We're now moving to the administrative but legally critical aspect of where these directives actually live permanently, and how you as a professional can trace them. Section 3913 explicitly states that airworthiness directives are indeed part of the Code of Federal Regulations. But there's a really important distinction here. They are not codified in the standard annual edition of the CFR that you might, buy in a book. Because ADs are being issued constantly, the FAA publishes them in full in the Federal Register as amendments to Section 3913. This is exactly how they maintain their legally binding status as active, breathing federal law without having to wait around for a yearly reprint.
For exhaustive pre-flight preparation, especially when you're reviewing the maintenance logs of an older, legacy airframe, you absolutely must know where to find prior amendments. Honestly, tracing an old AD from, say, 1949 often requires acting a bit like an aviation historian. But the editorial note in Part 39 provides a perfect historical map. If you're hunting for citations from 1949 to 1963, you're going to consult the list of sections affected. From 1964 through 2000, across 3 separate published volumes, you consult the list of CFR sections affected. And for ADs published since 2001, you just look at the entries for 14 CFR 39.13 in the list of CFR sections affected, which you can find in the Finding Aids section of the printed volume or digitally at www.fdsys.gov. You can also use the annual editions of the Federal Register Index. As professional aviators taking charge of an aircraft's airworthiness, knowing how to trace this regulatory lineage, it's completely non-negotiable.
Okay, let's jump into Section 4, Alternative Methods of Compliance, looking at 14 CFR 39.17 through 39.21.
Let's transition over to operational flexibilities. Specifically, how to handle a situation where a physical product change actually prevents you from complying with the AD exactly as it's written. Section 39.17 dictates that if a change in a product affects your ability to accomplish the required actions of an AD in any way, you must request FAA approval of an alternative method of compliance, commonly known in the industry as an AMOC. So what does an AMOC actually look like in practice? Well, it could be utilizing a different inspection technique, proposing a different repair material, or maybe even adjusting a compliance timeline based on newly submitted engineering data. The only exception to needing an AMOC is if you can definitively show that your prior change entirely eliminated the unsafe condition in the first place. Otherwise, your request must include the specific actions you're proposing to safely address that unsafe condition. You just can't ignore the AD just because your aircraft's modification makes the AD's instructions physically impossible to execute.
Breaking this down step by step per Section 3919, basically anyone may propose an alternative method of compliance or a change in compliance time, provided it offers an acceptable level of safety. So here's the strict chain of command. Unless authorized otherwise, you send your proposal, including specific actions to address the condition, straight to your principal inspector. The principal inspector reviews it, they might add some engineering or operational comments, and then they forward it to the manager of the office identified in the AD. Now, if you want, you can send a copy directly to the manager concurrently to sort of speed up the administrative process. And if you don't happen to have a principal inspector, you just submit directly to the manager. But remember this absolute rule. You may only proceed using your proposed alternative after the manager formally approves it in writing. No verbal okays here, it's got to be in writing.
Now, if you find yourself needing information on alternatives that might have already been approved for other operators, Section 39.21 directs you straight to the source. Each specific airworthiness directive clearly identifies the exact office responsible for approving AMOCs for that particular issue. That office maintains all the records and can provide information about alternatives it has already vetted and approved. Reaching out to them? Man, that can potentially save you immense time, money, and redundant engineering effort.
All right, moving on to Section 5, Special Flight Permits. That's 14 CFR 39.23 through 39.25.
So, what happens in the real world when your aircraft is out of compliance with an AD, making it legally unairworthy, but you actually need to get it to a maintenance base to perform the required AD work? Section 39.23 directly addresses this critical logistical procedure. The short answer to whether you can fly an aircraft to a repair facility to do the required work is yes. But it is heavily regulated to ensure aviation safety is never compromised during that ferry flight.
This brilliantly illustrates the procedural options you have available. First off,
Some commercial operators have provisions within their existing operation specifications that basically grant them the authority to fly to a repair facility. If you don't have this authority, your local Flight Standards District Office, or FSDO, may issue a special flight permit, often called a ferry permit, unless the specific AD strictly prohibits it. But be highly aware, the FAA's absolute priority is safety. Always remind yourself that safe to ferry and legally airworthy for standard operations are two completely different things in the eyes of the FSDO. They hold the authority to add stringent special operating requirements to your flight, like mandating VFR only, daytime operations only, or strictly no non-essential crew. Furthermore, they reserve the right to outright decline to issue the special flight permit if their inspectors determine you absolutely cannot move the aircraft safely under any circumstances.
And to execute that request with regulatory precision, Section 39.25 points you to the exact application procedures. Look, you don't just call up the control tower and ask for permission. You must formally apply to the FAA following the highly specific procedures codified in Title 14 CFR Part 21.199. Knowing exactly where to find the application requirements and how to file them correctly, well, that's what separates the amateur from the seasoned professional aviator.
Finally, we bring it home with Section 6, resolving document conflicts under 14 CFR 39.27. We arrive at a very common operational hurdle you'll find right on the hangar floor: how to handle conflicting directives when doing maintenance research. In some cases, as per Section 39.27, an AD incorporates a manufacturer's service document, like a mandatory service bulletin, by reference. When this happens, that service document effectively becomes part of the legally binding AD. However, the FAA will sometimes modify the directions of that service document right within the actual text of the AD itself, based on their own safety data. So if you ever find yourself looking at both the manufacturer's document and the AD, and there's a conflict between the two, Section 39.27 makes it absolute law. You must follow the requirements of the Airworthiness Directive. The AD is federal law, folks. It supersedes the manufacturer's service document every single time.
This brings us to the ultimate question for you, my fellow aviators. Having completed this comprehensive deep dive into Part 39 and knowing the sheer legal weight, the historical depth, and the massive safety implications of these regulations, how will you elevate your next pre-flight review? Remember, an uncomplied with AD isn't just a simple paperwork error. It's a compounding violation every single time the prop turns, and a critical, potential hazard to your life and the lives of your passengers. So take this knowledge, integrate it strictly into your logbook reviews, and ensure you are never the pilot operating an unairworthy aircraft. Keep striving for that next level of professional mastery, keep the blue side up, and I will see you in the next explainer.